The Manhattan skyline glowed in shades of grey and electric blue against the windows of the penthouse office on the 43rd floor. Rafael Romano sat motionless in a leather chair that cost more than most people's cars, his dark eyes fixed on the security footage playing across 3 monitors in front of him. Storm-colored eyes, sharp as a blade, missing nothing. His tailored black suit hung perfectly on broad shoulders, the white shirt beneath open at the collar revealing a chest marked with a thin silver chain and a scar that ran from collarbone to ribs. A map of violence survived. A gold Rolex caught the light on his left wrist, and on his right hand, a diamond ring caught fire in the glow of the screens. It was 3 in the morning on a Tuesday. The footage showed her again. The nanny, Clara Rivera, moving through the service entrance at 2:34 a.m. with a stuffed canvas bag clutched to her chest, her shoulders hunched like she was carrying the weight of the world. 5 feet 4 inches tall, dark hair pulled into a messy bun, wearing the grey uniform dress that marked her as household staff. But on the screen, something was different. The way she moved. The fear in every step. For 23 days, Rafael had watched her slip out through the back corridors. 23 nights. Same pattern. Same fear. She meets someone, Marco said from behind his shoulder. Marco Castellano, 38 years old, Rafael's right hand for the past decade. Broad-jawed, scarred neck, wearing a dark grey suit that complemented his reputation. Always the same location. The parking garage on 8th Avenue, 3 blocks away. Someone is paying her. Or threatening her, Gino added quietly. Gino Russo, younger by 5 years, sharper in the way that made him dangerous. He stood with his arms crossed, his eyes locked on the 3rd monitor, which showed the service entrance again. Look at her hands. Shaking. That is not the body language of someone making a deal. That is the body language of someone terrified. Rafael did not respond. He had learned long ago that silence was the most powerful weapon in any room. He simply watched the screens, watching Clara disappear into the darkness, watching the timestamps count forward, watching her return at dawn with dirt on her pale grey dress and a look in her dark eyes that suggested she had been crying. The Castellano family has been moving in our territory, Marco continued, his voice tight with the kind of loyalty that had kept him alive for over a decade. Perhaps she is their contact. Perhaps she has been inside this penthouse counting security protocols, mapping the layout, learning where your son sleeps. The mention of Noah changed something in the room. The air grew colder. Rafael's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She has been with us for 3 years, he said quietly. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, each word measured and final. She lives in a converted closet. She has not taken a single day off in 36 months. Last month, she donated her entire bonus to the children's ward at St. Mary's Hospital. You tell me the Castellano family would send their spy to weep in a hospital room over sick children. Marco exchanged a look with Gino, the kind of look that passed between men who had seen their boss destroy people for far less than suspicion. In 15 years of working for Rafael Romano, they had never heard him defend anyone. Not once. Loyalty in his world was a transaction, nothing more. You earned your place by proving you were useful. You kept your place by proving you would never betray him. Defending someone suggested something else entirely. What would you have us do? Gino asked carefully. Rafael did not answer. Instead, he rewound the footage to the moment she first appeared in the frame, and he pressed play. And he watched her again. Watched the trembling in her hands. Watched the way she glanced up at the security cameras like she knew they were there, like she was making a choice to be recorded anyway. Like whatever she was doing, she was willing to be caught. Like whatever she was doing, she believed it was worth the price. Continue monitoring, Rafael said finally. But nothing more. Not yet. For nights before this moment, before the screens and the surveillance and the questions that had no answers, Clara Rivera had been washing dishes in the kitchen of the Ashford family penthouse. The water was scalding hot, hot enough to turn her hands red and raw, and she had worked through the pain because pain was something she understood. Pain was predictable. Pain was something she could control. It was 11:15 p.m. on a Thursday. The Ashford penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a building in Manhattan's Upper East Side. Marble foyers. Crystal chandeliers. Furniture chosen by an interior designer who had never once consulted Clara about whether she liked the color scheme. The kitchen was all white and stainless steel, beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when they cost more than you will earn in your entire lifetime. Clara's hands moved through the hot water with the kind of efficiency that came from 3 years of repetition. Plate. Rinse. Rack. Plate. Rinse. Rack. Her dark hair was pulled back in a serviceable bun, and she wore the grey uniform dress that was provided by the Ashford family, along with the unspoken understanding that it belonged to them as much as her time did. She had $17 in her pocket. $17, and she had 2 weeks to come up with $22,000. The number sat in her chest like a stone, heavy and cold and immovable. $22,000. That was what the hospital had demanded. That was the price of her sister Rosa's surgery. Rosa, who was 24 years old and dying of something that could be fixed if they had the money. Rosa, who had called from the clinic that afternoon, her voice small and broken, saying the insurance had rejected the claim, saying there was a new deadline, saying Clara was her only option. The list of debts lived in Clara's pocket, written in her own careful handwriting on the back of an envelope. Every debt was accounted for. Every number was exact. Her rent, $350 for the converted closet on the 5th floor of the penthouse that the Ashford family graciously allowed her to sleep in. Her sister's medical bills. Her mother's funeral from 5 years ago, still unpaid. Her father's medical debt from before he died. Debt. 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 An endless accumulation of numbers that multiplied faster than she could work. Clara. The voice came from the doorway. High and sharp and dripping with a particular cruelty that came from never having been told no in your entire life. Victoria Ashford, 47 years old but dressed to appear 30, stood in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed. Her blonde hair was pulled back severely, her face composed into an expression of disappointment that was her natural resting state. She wore a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than Clara's annual salary, and her eyes, cold blue like water in winter, swept over Clara with the kind of assessment you might give a piece of furniture you were thinking of replacing. "Yes, Mrs. Ashford." Clara turned from the sink, wiping her hands on the kitchen towel. "Noah did not finish his vegetables tonight. I told him he could not leave the table until his plate was clean. He is crying in his room now. This is your fault. He has become too soft because you coddle him. He needs discipline, not affection." Clara felt something tighten in her chest, the same tightening that happened every time Victoria suggested that loving a child was somehow weakness. "He is 6 years old, Mrs. Ashford. He is supposed to cry sometimes. It means he is." "I was not asking for your opinion about child rearing," Victoria interrupted, her voice smooth as ice. "I was informing you that your services in the nursery are no longer satisfactory. However, I need you to remain in this household for another 3 weeks. After that, you will leave. I will be hiring a proper nanny. Someone with credentials. Someone who understands that sentiment is not a substitute for structure. 3 weeks. That was 21 days. 21 days of her salary, which was $200 per week plus meals and housing. $420 before taxes. $420 that she would never have. "I understand, Mrs. Ashford," Clara heard herself say, though her voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. Victoria turned and left without another word, her heels clicking against the marble floor in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. Clara sat down slowly on the kitchen stool, her hands beginning to shake. The list of numbers in her pocket suddenly felt heavier. 22,000. 420. $18,580 short. She did not cry. Her tears had dried up somewhere on a Greyhound bus 5 years ago, during her last attempt to escape her own life. Instead, she simply sat there and stared at her hands, watching them tremble like they belonged to a stranger. The sound of small feet running came from the hallway. Running, and then stopping, and then Noah appeared in the kitchen doorway, his small face streaked with tears. 6 years old, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes like his father's, sharp and aware and far too intelligent for someone so young. "Vivi is mean," he said, the way children do. He called Victoria Vivi because he could not pronounce her full name, and she had stopped correcting him months ago. "I do not like when she is mean to you." Clara stood up quickly, pushing away the stone in her chest, pushing away the fear, pushing away everything except the immediate need to comfort this small boy who had somehow come to love her. "Come here," she said softly. "Come here, Noah." He ran to her without hesitation, and she picked him up, settling him on her hip the way she had done 1,000 times before. His small arms wrapped around her neck, and his head fitted into the hollow of her shoulder like it was made for this exact moment. "Do not listen to her," Noah whispered. "She is not my mama. You are my mama. You are the one who makes me feel safe." The words broke something in Clara that had been holding together by force of will alone. She pressed her face into his dark hair and let herself breathe, let herself feel, let herself love this child who had never done anything except teach her that her heart was still capable of breaking. "I know, sweet boy," she whispered. "I know." While Clara held Noah in the kitchen of a penthouse that was not her home, Rafael Romano sat in a black SUV 3 blocks away, conducting a meeting that would determine whether a man named Anthony Caruso lived to see the sunrise. The SUV was parked in an underground garage. No windows. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of expensive cologne. Anthony Caruso sat in the back seat, his suit torn, his face already beginning to bruise. He had made a deal with the Castellano family to move cocaine through Rafael's territory. He had believed Rafael would not find out. He had believed very many foolish things. "Please," Anthony said, his voice destroyed. "Please, I have 3 daughters. I have a wife at home. I was desperate for money. That is all. I was desperate." Rafael looked at him the way he might look at an insect he was about to crush beneath his shoe. 42 years old, Anthony was, trying to sound young and afraid in hopes that youth and fear might buy him mercy. Rafael had learned long ago that mercy was a luxury he could not afford. "Desperation is not an excuse," Rafael said quietly. His voice did not raise. His voice never raised. This was one of the things that made him dangerous, the absolute calm of a man who did not need to shout to be heard. Desperation is a choice. You chose poorly. Marco stepped forward from the shadows. A gun appeared in his hand. This was how business was conducted in Rafael's world, swift, clean, final. But then Marco's phone buzzed. And he checked it. And his eyes widened slightly. "The security system," Marco said urgently. "There is a breach. The service entrance. Downstairs." Rafael's entire body went rigid. "The penthouse." "Noah." What happens next would happen fast, faster than thought, faster than prayer, faster than the moment itself could properly contain. Rafael would leave the garage with 14 men in tailored suits and violence in their eyes. The black SUV would scream through the Manhattan streets at speeds that should have crashed the vehicle but did not. The penthouse doors would open not to the sound of a key but to the sound of his presence, his fury, his refusal to tolerate threat to the only person in the world he still loved. And he would find her. But that moment, that crucial, devastating moment, was still minutes away. And in those minutes, Clara Rivera made a choice that would change everything. Preston Mercer's fist came through the penthouse kitchen window at 11:34 p.m. 3 years earlier, on a morning when the city was still learning how to breathe, Clara Rivera stood in the marble foyer of a penthouse that smelled like leather furniture and imported flowers. 28 years old, but her eyes carried the exhaustion of someone who had lived 40. Her sneakers, worn through at the heel, the laces tied with a plastic grocery bag knot, looked impossibly small against the floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the entire Manhattan skyline back at her like a mirror showing her how far she still had to climb. Victoria Ashford descended the staircase like she was walking onto a stage where she was guaranteed to be the only applause in the room. Diamonds caught the light at her throat, her wrists, her ears. Designer clothes that cost more than Clara's monthly rent draped across her frame like they had been custom sewn to whisper of wealth with every movement. She was beautiful in the way that cruelty often is, sharp-edged, polished, dangerous. She circled Clara slowly. Like a predator. Like someone measuring the distance to prey. The last 3 quit within months, Victoria said, her voice smooth like silk wrapped around broken glass. 1 lasted 6 weeks. 1 lasted 5 days. She said Noah was difficult. She said he would not listen. She said he screamed at night. Victoria paused, tilted her head. Think you will last longer? Clara's hands trembled. She pressed them into her thighs. I have experience with children, Clara said quietly. And I am a very hard worker. I do not leave jobs once I have committed to them. What she did not say was this: I am running from a man who broke my ribs. I am running from a man who has friends in the police department who tear up restraining orders like they are grocery lists. I am running from a man named Preston Mercer who promised he would find me no matter where I hid. And I need this job more than I need oxygen. Victoria smiled. It was not a kind smile. 14-hour days, she said. 6 in the morning until 8 in the evening. You will sleep here. We have a converted closet off the kitchen. It is quite comfortable, I assure you. Well, as comfortable as a converted closet can be. She laughed, and the sound hung in the air like something rotten. And you will care for my son. He is 6 years old. Difficult. Withdrawn. He goes through nannies like tissues. His father is never here. My husband travels constantly on business. I have my own obligations. The penthouse was silent except for the sound of traffic 40 stories below, muffled and distant, like the world was happening somewhere else, somewhere far away. How much? Clara asked. $1,800 a month. Cash. No benefits. No time off except Sundays. You will sleep in the closet room. You will eat what we eat, but the family meal is at 7 p.m. You may eat after we finish. Victoria's eyes glittered. Any questions? Clara had many questions. Instead, she shook her head. When can I start? She asked. Today. The converted closet was 6 feet by 8 feet. No window. A single cot with white sheets that smelled like bleach. 1 shelf. A bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling like a confession. When Clara pulled the door closed, the space swallowed her whole. She sat on the edge of the cot and felt something in her chest crack open, something that might have been relief or might have been the sound of hope finally surrendering. But it did not matter. She was alive. She was hidden. She was safe. For now. That first afternoon, Victoria brought Noah to meet her. The boy was small for 6, with dark curls and green eyes that seemed to look through Clara rather than at her. When she reached down to tie his shoe, he flinched. His entire body contracted like she had raised her hand to strike him. It is okay, Clara said very gently. I am just helping with your shoe. See? The lace is loose. We tie it so it stays tight. Like this. Like a knot. Like holding on. Noah watched her hands but did not move. His jaw clenched. The weeks unfolded in small moments that accumulated like snow. Clara learned that Noah did not speak much. She learned that he woke screaming from nightmares at 2 in the morning, 3, 4. She learned that he flinched at loud voices. She learned that when she sat beside him in the dark, humming a song her own mother had taught her in a kitchen that no longer existed, his breathing would slow. His shoulders would drop. He would eventually sleep. One morning, 3 weeks into the job, she braided his hair, carefully, gently, narrating each movement the way one might narrate a funeral, slowly, with reverence. When she finished, Noah looked at himself in the mirror. And then, so quietly that Clara almost missed it, he smiled. "Pretty," he said. His first word to her that was not a question or a refusal. Just, pretty. Clara's eyes burned with tears she did not let fall. Every night, after Victoria had gone to bed, after the penthouse had gone silent in the way that only very expensive buildings can be silent, Noah would creep into the closet room. He would curl up at the foot of her cot, still wearing his pajamas with the rocket ships on them, and she would read to him. Quietly. Carefully. Never loud enough for Victoria to hear. "Good night, Moon," she read one night, her voice barely a whisper in the darkness of that 6x8 room. "Good night, bears. Good night, chairs. Good night, kittens. Good night, mittens. Good night, sad," Noah said suddenly. Clara stopped reading. "What?" she whispered. "Colors for sad days," he continued, as if explaining something she should already know. "When she feels sad, look at this." He pressed his small hand against the cover of the book, where the moon glowed yellow against a field of stars. Yellow moon. Not sad anymore. Clara pulled him close. She did not let herself cry. Not yet. But what she did not know was that on the night she read to Noah, a man stood in the hallway outside the kitchen. Listening. Watching. A man who appeared at the penthouse 2 or 3 times a month under the guise of being an uncle. A man named Rafael Romano, who owned this building and 7 others, who owned restaurants and legitimate businesses and other enterprises that did not appear on any public record. He would stand there in the darkness of the hallway, listening to her voice, soft and steady and full of a tenderness he had not heard in years, and something would shift in his chest. Something cold. Something that felt dangerously like memory. His son. His own son, who had never smiled for any of the other nannies. His own son, who flinched at touch and screamed in the darkness and refused to speak. Now this woman, this ghost in a borrowed closet, was teaching him that sad could become something bearable. That darkness could contain a yellow moon. Rafael did not understand yet what this meant. He only knew that when he looked at Clara Rivera, truly looked at her, not as an employee of the Ashford household but as a person, he saw someone who was drowning just as deeply as his son. He saw someone with nothing. Absolutely nothing. And something in him recognized that. Meanwhile, 3 blocks away, in a basement apartment that smelled like cigarette smoke and failure, Preston Mercer sat at a computer table and smiled at the screen. He had found her. The bank account had been the first clue, Clara Rivera, making small, regular deposits of exactly $1,800. Always on Friday. Always to the same account. And now he knew where the deposits were coming from. A penthouse on Park Avenue. An address. A building. A place where she could not run anymore because she had finally stopped running. Preston's fingers flexed. He cracked his knuckles. He had waited a long time for this moment. He had waited long enough. The sound that woke Clara at 2:17 in the morning was the sound of her own name being screamed through the kitchen window. Just her name, over and over, raw and desperate and absolutely certain that she would answer. She sat up in the cot. Noah was already awake, already crying, already reaching for her. In the hallway, somewhere above her in that towering penthouse, Victoria Ashford heard the screaming too. And she smiled in the darkness because she had been waiting for this moment as well. Because Victoria had made a phone call 3 days ago. And in that phone call, she had given a man named Preston Mercer the address he had been searching for. And she had told him exactly when to come, and exactly which window to break, and she had told him that she would make sure the security system was disabled, because Clara Rivera was becoming a problem. A problem that needed to be solved. And Victoria Ashford was very good at solving problems. Especially problems that could not scream loud enough for anyone to hear. The screaming through the kitchen window at 2:17 in the morning was the sound of a man who had finally found what he thought he owned. Clara's eyes snapped open in the darkness of her converted closet room, her body moving on pure instinct before her mind caught up to what was happening. Noah was already crying, already reaching for her with small fists that knew nothing of the world's cruelty yet. Downstairs, somewhere in the vast penthouse above her tiny space, Victoria Ashford heard the screaming too. She smiled in the darkness, because she had made a phone call 3 days ago. And in that phone call, she had given a man named Preston Mercer the address he had been searching for, the exact window to break, and the security code to disable because Clara Rivera had become a problem that needed solving. But that was later. First came the playground. 6 o'clock in the evening, for days before the screaming. The July sky was turning green-black with the weight of a summer thunderstorm building on the horizon. The humidity hung so thick it felt like drowning in air. Victoria had demanded silence in the penthouse, demanded it with the casual cruelty of someone accustomed to having her demands obeyed, so Clara took Noah to Central Park, to the playground near the Bethesda Terrace where the old maple trees offered shelter and the swings faced away from the gathering storm. Noah was 5 years old, small for his age, with dark eyes identical to his father's and hair that curled at the nape of his neck when the humidity rose. He wore a cream-colored linen shirt that cost more than everything Clara owned, swinging high, laughing with the pure abandon of a child who did not yet understand that the world breaks beautiful things. Clara stood nearby, watching, the way she had watched him for 3 years, measuring his safety with the precision of someone who understood that children are more fragile than glass, more precious than gold, more deserving of protection than anyone else on earth. That was when she noticed the black SUV circling the parking area for the 3rd time. It was the same vehicle from 3 days ago, the one she had seen parked across the street from the penthouse. The same one from the diner where she had worked 5 years ago, before she ran, before she disappeared into the identity of Clara Rivera, nanny, invisible, safe. Her stomach tightened. Her heart moved into her throat. Preston Mercer stepped out of the driver's seat like a man stepping into a moment he had been waiting years for. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of handsome that had nothing to do with his face and everything to do with the danger that radiated from him like a weapon. His knuckles were scarred from fights with women who could not fight back. His eyes held the wild, glittering look of someone who had been drinking since morning. 2 men flanked him, hired muscle, the kind you rent when you want someone hurt but do not want to do it yourself. Clara's breath came shallow. She positioned herself between Preston and the playground equipment, every muscle tensing into a cage of protection. Noah had stopped swinging, sensing the shift in the air the way children do, the way small animals sense the arrival of predators. "You think you can hide from me?" Preston's voice was slurred, reeking of whiskey and something darker. "You think you can just leave? Take what's mine." "Noah, run to the bathroom building," Clara said, her voice steady even as her hand shook. "Lock the door and do not open it for anyone except me." The boy hesitated, and in that hesitation she saw the terrible cost of love, the way it makes you slow, the way it makes you want to understand rather than survive. She made her voice sharp, now. He ran. Preston's hand closed around her throat like a vice made of bone and rage. He lifted her off the ground, her feet dangling, the world going black at the edges, her oxygen running out in a sequence that felt like dying. She kicked backward, found the soft tissue of his knee, felt something give beneath her heel. His grip loosened for a fraction of a second, not much, just enough. She clawed at his face, tasted blood, screamed Noah's name toward the bathroom building while Preston's fist found her eye socket with the crack of breaking bone. The pain was white-hot, immediate, total. She tasted more blood. One of Preston's men grabbed for Noah's backpack, but Clara's body moved on instinct deeper than thought, tackling him with ribs she would later learn were cracked, getting punched in the stomach, the chest, the face, but not stopping, not ever stopping, not while breath still moved through her lungs. She did not know this child's full name. She did not know his father was the most feared man in New York. She only knew that no one would hurt him while she was breathing. The siren started in the distance, someone had called 911, someone had been brave, and Preston's men dragged him back toward the SUV, still screaming threats, his voice cracking with fury and something that might have been obsession. "This is not over, Clara. You are mine. You will always be mine. Clara crawled to the bathroom building, moving like a wounded animal, every breath sending pain through her ribs. Noah was inside, locked in the small room, sobbing so hard he could not breathe. She gathered him, paid a taxi driver her last $17, every bill and coin she possessed in the world, and got them home. It was 11:34 p.m. when they stumbled into the marble foyer of the penthouse. The floor was white, the size of a tennis court, and Clara's blood dripped onto it in dark droplets like a map of violence. One eye was swollen shut. Purple handprints wrapped around her throat like a necklace of proof. Blood ran from the split in her lip down onto her chin. Noah clung to her, screaming "Mama, Mama," while his small hands gripped her shirt. The front door opened. Rafael Romano walked through it with the same grace he walked through everything, deliberate, controlled, each movement the result of careful calculation. He was tall, 6'2", with broad shoulders that his black tailored suit had been sewn specifically to fit. His shirt was open at the collar, showing the dark hair on his chest. He still smelled like basil and wine from his restaurant, like he had just walked through a normal evening in a normal life. His hair was dark, silvered at the temples in a way that made him look like he had aged 1,000 years in the span of a decade. But it was his eyes that stopped everything, storm gray, intense, the eyes of a man who had seen things that cannot be unseen. He froze. His son was crying "Mama, Mama" while holding this bleeding woman. A woman he knew only as the nanny, the invisible help who slept in a converted closet and seemed to love his child more than he could manage to love Noah himself. Rafael's world stopped. He had not heard anyone call someone "Mama" since his first child died 7 years ago. The word hung in the air between them like a curse that could not be erased. He crossed the foyer in 3 strides and lifted Noah with one arm, cradling his son against his chest, then reached down and lifted Clara with the other, supporting her full weight as she swayed. "I have you," he said, his voice deep and solid like an oath. "You are safe now. Both of you." He carried them up the grand staircase, through hallways lined with paintings that cost millions, toward the master bedroom. Behind him he was making calls, to his private doctor, to Marco, to Gino, while Noah buried his face in his father's neck and Clara hung suspended between shock and the terrible weight of knowing that everything had changed. Dr. Chen arrived within 20 minutes, a small Asian man with careful hands who had stitched up Rafael's soldiers for 15 years without ever asking questions. He treated Clara's injuries in the master bedroom with the precision of someone who understood pain. 6 stitches above her eyebrow. 2 cracked ribs wrapped so tight she could barely breathe. Ice packs for the swelling that was turning her eye the color of rotted fruit. Antibiotics for the split lip, the torn skin inside her cheek, the small cuts on her knuckles from fighting. Noah refused to leave her side, curled against her on the bed, his small hand stroking her hair, whispering in his child's voice, "You are okay now. Mama is okay." Rafael stood in the doorway and watched his son say the word, "Mama," and watched Clara's face break at hearing it, tears running down her unswollen cheek, silent and total and absolute. Marco and Gino arrived in dark suits, their hands resting on the guns visible at their waists. Marco was broad-shouldered, older, with a scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone. Gino was younger, leaner, with the kind of face that could have belonged to a banker or a murderer. Both looked ready to commit violence. Rafael held up one hand, a gesture that stopped them mid-stride. "Not yet," he said. "First I need to understand." At 2 a.m., Noah finally slept, curled between them on the vast bed. Clara lay still, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too deep because of the ribs. Rafael sat in the chair beside the bed, his expensive suit somehow still immaculate despite everything. "Are you going to fire me?" Clara's voice came out shattered, like glass. "Fire you?" Rafael leaned forward. "Clara, look at me. You took fists meant to break bones. You could have run." "Why?" She met his eyes. "Because he calls me Mama when he thinks no one is listening. Because I will die before I let anyone hurt him." Something in Rafael's chest shifted, a tectonic movement of something long frozen. "Tell me everything," he said. "Tell me who did this. Tell me why." Tell me what you need. The words came pouring out of her like blood from an artery. Preston Mercer, her ex-boyfriend, had been tracking her for weeks. The restraining orders she had obtained were destroyed by corrupt police officers who worked for him. He had threatened her sister. He was demanding money, $22,000, in exchange for not hurting the children. Protection money. Extortion wrapped in the language of love and ownership. She pulled out a piece of paper from her pocket, worn from constant folding, and handed it to Rafael with shaking hands. The list read, 8,000 hospital, 6,200 sister, 4,100 lawyer, 3,700 landlord. Debts that had metastasized, growing like tumors, consuming her. Why $22,000 in 2 weeks? Rafael's voice had dropped to something quiet and dangerous. That is when he said he would come. That is the deadline. Rafael read the list twice, his jaw tightening until the muscles stood out like cords. Why would you help me? Clara asked. I am nobody. I have nothing. I just need to make it 2 more weeks, somehow get the money, and disappear. Keep Noah safe until you find someone better. You are not nobody, Rafael said, and his voice carried the weight of an oath. You protected my son. And I am going to tell you something that changes everything. He told her then, slowly, carefully, the way you tell someone something that will unmake their world and remake it into something else entirely. His name was not Richard Ashford. That was a cover, a fiction created decades ago when he had stepped into the family business, into the darkness. His real name was Rafael Romano. Noah was his son. And this penthouse, this fortress of glass and steel and imported marble, was his home, which meant it was her home now. She had been living under his protection for 3 years without knowing it. Clara's face went white. She knew that name. Everyone in New York knew that name. Rafael Romano. The man who owned half the city. The man whose word was law. The man whose enemies disappeared the way morning fog disappears beneath the sun. I cannot accept this, she whispered. You already have, Rafael said. And you will continue to accept it because my son loves you and that makes you sacred. Do you understand me? She nodded, unable to speak. That was when Victoria Ashford appeared in the doorway of the master bedroom, wearing a designer nightgown that probably cost more than Clara's yearly salary, her face twisted with fury so pure it was almost beautiful. What is SHE doing in here? Victoria's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. Rafael's expression did not change. She was attacked protecting Noah. Attacked? Our son. Victoria moved into the room, her eye scanning Clara with absolute contempt. She is the help. She sleeps in the closet. This is completely inappropriate. Get her out of my husband's bedroom immediately. My bedroom, Rafael corrected quietly. And no. Victoria's face flushed. You are choosing her over me? Over your wife. I am choosing my son, Rafael said. You made your choice 3 years ago when you stopped being his mother. You attend galas. You maintain your position. But you have not tucked Noah into bed since he was 2 years old. You do not know his teacher's name. You feed him to nannies and surgeons and anyone else who will take him off your hands because motherhood is inconvenient and you are not a convenient woman. How dare you? Get out, Rafael said, his voice dropping to ice. Now. Before I have Marco remove you physically. Victoria's eyes flashed with something that was not defeat but calculation, not sadness but rage transformed into strategy. She turned and left, her nightgown trailing behind her, but her mind was already working, already planning, already figuring out how to take back what she considered hers. At 4 in the morning, with Noah asleep and the penthouse silent except for the rain beginning to hammer against the windows, Clara told Rafael her full story. Met Preston at a diner where she waitressed. He had seemed perfect for 6 months, then the first slap, then the hospital visit she lied about, fell downstairs, always falling. Then the broken arm. Then running with nothing but 2 garbage bags and $17 in her pocket. Rafael listened, his knuckles white as he gripped the chair arms. Then he told her about Mateo. His first son. Stillborn 7 years ago. The cord had wrapped around the baby's neck and Rafael had held the silent blue body while his ex-wife screamed and screamed. He had never entered the nursery on the 3rd floor since. He had thrown himself into the family business, into the violence, the darkness, the empire built on fear, to forget. He barely knew Noah existed for the first 2 years because looking at his second son meant remembering the first. I have killed 40 men, Rafael said. I have burned businesses, destroyed families, built an empire on the backs of people begging for mercy I would not give. But I could not walk into that nursery. I could not say my son's name out loud. He paused, and when he spoke again his voice was barely audible. Then 3 years ago I saw you reading to Noah in that closet room and he was smiling. He was alive. And you saw him when I could not see anything but ghosts. Clara reached across the space between them and took his hand. Outside, 3 blocks away in a basement apartment that smelled like cigarette smoke and failure, Preston Mercer was meeting with Victoria Ashford in a 24-hour diner. The agreement between them was simple, $50,000 to make Clara disappear permanently, to make it look like she had run away again, frightened and broken. With Clara gone, Victoria would reclaim her position as Noah's mother, and Rafael's attention would return to her where it belonged. They shook hands across the table while thunder cracked across the sky outside. What changed everything was the decision Rafael made at dawn. He picked up his phone and called Marco. I need 24-hour surveillance on Clara Rivera, he said. And I need everything on Preston Mercer by sunrise. I want his location, his connections, his weaknesses. I want to know every corrupt cop he has paid off, every threat he has made, every lie he has told. He hung up the phone and looked at Clara, still asleep with Noah curled against her, and something cold and dangerous stirred in his chest. Sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. 3 weeks. 21 days of surveillance that felt like 21 years. Rafael Romano stood in his penthouse office high above Manhattan, rain streaking the floor-to-ceiling windows, photographs spread across the mahogany desk like an indictment. Clara in a parking garage at midnight. Clara handing something to a man in a black sedan. Clara glancing over her shoulder, constantly afraid, constantly running. Marco entered without knocking, closing the door with the kind of quiet that meant he carried bad news. The man she meets is FBI, Marco said. His voice was flat, professional, the voice of a man delivering a death sentence. Agent Dennis Morrison. She has been wearing a wire for 3 weeks. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Rafael did not move. His hand rested on one photograph, Clara's face caught mid-conversation, her mouth open, her eyes darting. Looking guilty. Looking exactly like someone selling information to a rival operation. Where is she now? Rafael asked. With Noah. She is bathing him for bed. Rafael closed his eyes. Noah, 6 years old, calling her mama when no one was listening. Noah reaching for her hand in crowded rooms. Noah drawing her pictures with the sun in the corner and both of them holding hands underneath it. Upstairs, Clara read Noah a bedtime story in a voice that trembled like a candle in the wind. The book was old, pages bent from 100 readings, a story about a boy and a wolf who learned to trust each other. Noah's small hand was wrapped around her thumb, his breathing slowing as sleep approached. Will the wolf hurt him? Noah whispered. No, Clara said. The wolf was just lonely. He was just scared of being alone. She kissed his forehead and stepped into the hallway, closing the door so softly it made no sound. The weight of 3 weeks pressed down on her shoulders like hands pushing her underwater. The wire was underneath her shirt, recording nothing tonight because Morrison had told her to wait, that the raid was coming at dawn, that Rafael's men were getting close to discovering the truth and she needed to be ready. Downstairs, Rafael picked up his phone. I want her followed everywhere, he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, but beneath it ran something else, something cold, something dangerous. Every breath. Every word. And I want you to find out what information she has sold. Already done, Marco said. She has been meeting with Morrison twice weekly. They exchange manila envelopes. She is wearing a wire. The FBI is building a case against someone. Against me, Rafael said. It was not a question. Possibly. Rafael moved to the window and looked down at the city 40 stories below, lights blurring through the rain. Somewhere down there in a basement apartment that smelled like cigarette smoke and failure, Preston Mercer was making phone calls to numbers that were not his. And in a penthouse on the Upper East Side, Victoria Ashford was adjusting her diamond earrings and preparing to smile at charity galas while plotting the kidnapping of his son. But Rafael did not know these things yet. What Rafael knew was this: Clara Rivera had moved into his home 3 years ago as a nanny, sleeping in a converted closet, loving his son more fiercely than blood required. He had watched her teach Noah to read, to laugh, to believe that the world contained goodness. He had caught himself listening for her footsteps in hallways. He had found himself creating reasons to be in rooms she occupied. And somewhere in the wreckage of his black heart, something had begun to grow. And now she was selling him to the FBI. The order was simple. One word from Rafael and Marco would handle it. She would disappear. They would say she had run away again, frightened and broken, unable to handle the demands of the job. The story would be clean. The problem would be solved. He picked up his pen and wrote the execution order on a piece of cream-colored paper, his handwriting precise, controlled. The order that would end her. Then he sealed it in an envelope and placed it on the desk. It happens at dawn, Rafael said. I want it done quietly. She does not know what is coming. Marco withdrew, and Rafael was alone with the photographs and the rain and the weight of what he was about to do. Across the city, in a 24-hour diner on the edge of Queens, Preston Mercer and Victoria Ashford sat in a booth by the window, the parking lot empty except for a few cars with sleeping drivers. Preston's hand shook as he lifted his coffee cup. Victoria looked composed, diamond rings catching the fluorescent light, her nails perfectly manicured, her expression sharp as broken glass. The FBI raid happens at dawn, Victoria said. Which means Clara needs to disappear before then. I have been calling her, Preston said. She keeps saying she will meet me. She says she wants to make a deal. But that rat is wearing a wire. Victoria smiled, and it was not a smile at all but the baring of teeth. Then you threaten Noah. You tell her if she does not meet you in person, no wire, no backup, you will take him. She will come alone. And you will kill her where the body will never be found. Preston's hand shook harder. And then? And then I comfort Rafael over her tragic disappearance. And then Noah needs a mother again. And then I become indispensable. Victoria leaned back in the booth. He has loved her for months. I have watched it happen. But love in a man like Rafael is a weakness, and weaknesses can be exploited. Once she is gone, he will remember what we were to each other. He will remember that I belong in that penthouse with him, not some closet-dwelling orphan. They shook hands across the table while thunder cracked across the sky outside. At 2 a.m., Clara stood on the master bedroom balcony of the penthouse, rain hammering down, soaking through her thin cotton nightgown, her skin erupting in goosebumps. Manhattan spread out below her in a constellation of lights, 40 stories down, the marble courtyard waiting with mathematical precision. Agent Morrison had called 2 hours earlier. The raid was coming at dawn. She had done everything they asked. She had worn the wire. She had documented everything. She had put herself between Rafael and danger and Preston and Noah's kidnapping and the federal government all at once, and now she was standing on the edge of a balcony because the weight of it could not be held anymore. Her hands were bruised. Her throat still showed Preston's fingerprints from the parking garage, where he had slammed her against a car and wrapped his fingers around her windpipe and told her he was taking everything from her. The wire was hidden in her bra, recording the silence of the night. She was 28 years old and broken and alone and had $17 to her name and a handwritten list of debts that would never be paid and bruises in shapes that looked like poetry if you squinted at them in the mirror. The railing was cold under her palms. Then, through the rain-streaked glass, she saw a light click on in Noah's room. His night light, shaped like a star, casting a gentle glow. She heard him whimper in his sleep, the sound of a child having a nightmare, probably calling for her in his dream. Clara stepped back from the edge. She went inside, still dripping wet, and found Noah sitting up in bed with his eyes half closed, tears streaming down his face. She scooped him into her arms and held him against her soaked chest, and he wrapped himself around her like she was the only solid thing in a falling world. "I had a bad dream," he whispered. "I know, baby. I know." She rocked him. "But I am here. I am not going anywhere." The lie tasted like metal on her tongue because by noon, everything would have changed. The FBI would have arrested Preston and Victoria. Rafael would have learned that she was an informant. And she would be the woman who betrayed him, no matter how many times she told him she was trying to save his son. But for now, in the darkness, she held the child who called her Mama and promised him safety and meant it with every cell in her broken body. At 6:22 a.m., the first black SUV pulled up to Preston Mercer's apartment in Queens. Then 11 more arrived with the precision of a military operation, blocking every exit, tires hissing against wet pavement. Federal agents in tactical gear emerged like ghosts, rifles held across their chests, faces blank and focused. Agent Dennis Morrison carried the battering ram himself. He was a tall man, 42 years old, with a kind of tired eyes that had seen too much violence and decided to spend his life fighting it from the other side. He had recruited Clara 3 weeks ago outside Noah's school, and he had watched her decide that saving a child mattered more than saving herself. The battering ram hit the door. The lock shattered. The door exploded inward on its hinges. Preston Mercer was in boxers, stumbling backward, his hands up, his voice cracking. "You cannot do this. I have rights. I have friends. I have." Morrison slapped handcuffs on him with efficient brutality. "Preston Mercer, you are under arrest for extortion, racketeering, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and 23 counts of assault against multiple victims across New York City." Preston collapsed. His legs gave out and he crumpled to the floor, trembling like a cornered animal, tears streaming down his face. The recording equipment in his apartment was seized. His phone was photographed. His contacts were documented. And at that same hour, in a different building, federal agents arrived at the penthouse on the Upper East Side. Rafael was in his office when they entered. He stood slowly, and his hand moved toward the gun on his desk, but Morrison had his weapon drawn and trained on Rafael's chest with the kind of focus that said he had done this before. "Do not reach for it," Morrison said. His voice was quiet and professional. "Step back from the desk." Rafael stepped back. "We are not here for you," Morrison said. "Not today." Victoria Ashford was arrested in her bedroom, still in bed, her silk sleep mask pulled up onto her forehead, diamonds glinting from every surface. She was led away in handcuffs, screaming that this was a mistake, that her lawyers would destroy them, that she was Victoria Ashford and this could not be happening to someone like her. Morrison played the recordings for Rafael. Victoria's voice, hiring Preston to attack Clara. Victoria's voice, discussing Noah's kidnapping in detail. Victoria's voice, discussing payment. $30,000 to make a child disappear. Rafael's world fractured. "Clara Rivera has been our informant for 3 weeks, Morrison said. She wore a wire. She documented everything. She saved your son's life while risking her own. She did this knowing you would probably kill her for it." The office door opened. Clara stood in the doorway, exhausted, her hair unbrushed, her eyes hollow with 3 weeks of fear and wire and lies and impossible choices. She wore a T-shirt that said New York Public Library and had belonged to her mother, who had died when Clara was 12, and she had kept it all these years as a reminder that love was worth the price of broken hearts. She and Rafael stared at each other across the destroyed office. He saw her now as she truly was, not a betrayer, but a shield. Not a liar, but a sentinel. She had stood in front of danger and said no, not this child, not on my watch, and she had done it alone. Rafael moved toward her. His steps were slow, deliberate, the steps of a man walking through fire. When he reached her, he did what he had never done before in front of anyone. He fell to his knees. "Forgive me," he said. His voice cracked. "I almost killed you." Clara reached down and pulled him up. She held him, this terrible man, this Mafia boss, this man who had ordered her death and then stopped his own hand at the last moment, and she held him like he was Noah, like he was a child who had been terrified and alone for too long. Outside, sirens wailed across Manhattan. Preston Mercer was being transported to federal holding. Victoria Ashford's face was splashed across news channels. The corrupt officers she had paid were being arrested simultaneously. By sunrise, everything had changed. The office was destroyed. Paper scattered across Rafael Romano's mahogany desk like snow after an avalanche, lamp overturned, the leather chair where he had sat for 15 years now bearing a fist-shaped dent. Morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Manhattan penthouse, illuminating dust particles that floated through the air like ghosts of decisions unmade. Agent Morrison stood near the door, his badge catching the sunlight. Federal Bureau of Investigation. The words on his jacket seemed to vibrate in the silence. Rafael's hands trembled as he stared at the surveillance photographs spread across his desk. 12 photographs. Each one showing Clara Rivera. Meeting with Morrison. Wearing a wire under her clothes, the small microphone visible in 3 separate shots. 3 weeks of deception. 3 weeks of gathering evidence while he had watched her with suspicion burning in his chest like acid. "She has been our informant for 3 weeks, Morrison said. His voice carried no triumph, only fact. She wore a wire. She documented everything. She saved your son's life while risking her own. She did this knowing you would probably kill her for it." The office door opened. Clara stood in the doorway, exhausted, her hair unbrushed, her eyes hollow with 3 weeks of fear and wire and lies and impossible choices. She wore a t-shirt that said New York Public Library and had belonged to her mother, who had died when Clara was 12, and she had kept it all these years as a reminder that love was worth the price of broken hearts. Her hands hung at her sides. She did not try to explain. She did not try to justify. She simply stood there and let him see her. Rafael and Clara stared at each other across the destroyed office. He saw her now as she truly was. Not a betrayer. Not a spy. Not a weapon wielded by federal agents. But a shield. A sentinel. Someone who had stood in front of danger and said no, not this child, not on my watch, and she had done it alone, terrified, betting everything on the hope that he would eventually understand. "You let me believe you were betraying me," Rafael said. His voice was low, dangerous, the voice of a man standing at the edge of a precipice. "I was protecting Noah," Clara answered. She did not flinch. "If I told you about the FBI, Morrison said you would disappear and Noah would be unprotected. Preston would still be out there. Those corrupt officers would still be looking for leverage." Rafael moved toward her. His steps were slow, deliberate, the steps of a man walking through fire. When he reached her, he did what he had never done before in front of anyone. He fell to his knees. "Forgive me," he said. His voice cracked like ice breaking on a frozen river. "I almost killed you. This morning I had the order written. 2 shots to the back of the head. I was minutes away from." He could not finish. Clara reached down and pulled him up. She held him, this terrible man, this Mafia boss who had ordered her death, this man who commanded 12,000 employees and controlled half the city's underground, and she held him like he was Noah, like he was a child who had been terrified and alone for too long. Outside, sirens wailed across Manhattan. Preston Mercer was being transported to federal holding. The sirens grew louder, then faded. Everything was ending. Everything was beginning. 3 weeks later, the sun moved differently through the penthouse. Clara's new room was on the second floor, windows facing Central Park, real sunlight pouring across hardwood floors, a bed with white cotton sheets that smelled like lavender detergent, bookshelves lining the walls. Rafael had filled them himself. Novels, poetry, children's books for reading to Noah, art books, history books, the kinds of books people owned when they had time to read them, when they had the luxury of curiosity. On her nightstand sat a single piece of paper. Her handwritten list of debts. Paid stamped across it in red ink. 8,000 to the hospital. 6,200 to her sister. 4,100 to the lawyer. 3,700 to the landlord. Every number she had counted and recounted in the dark of that closet room, every dollar that had felt impossible, now marked as finished. Her new salary was $6,500 a month with benefits. Health insurance. Dental. A 401k that Rafael's accountant had set up without asking. She had not cried when she saw the paperwork. She had sat very still and not cried. Rafael knocked on her door frame at 7 in the evening. He wore his shirt sleeves rolled up, his gold watch catching the last of the sunset light. Behind him, Noah appeared in pajamas with dinosaurs on them, his hair still wet from his bath. Dinner, Noah announced. Papa is cooking. Is he? Clara said, and she smiled, and it was not a careful smile, not a smile she had learned to make while afraid. It was real. Downstairs, Rafael's kitchen was transformed into something warm. Pasta water boiling, garlic and tomatoes sizzling in olive oil, the smell rising through the penthouse like a prayer. Noah climbed onto a bar stool and watched his father work with absolute concentration. Clara stood beside Rafael, and when he reached for the salt, his hand brushed hers. She did not pull away. They ate at the kitchen counter, the three of them. Noah sat between them, chattering about his school, about a girl named Sophia who had given him a drawing of a cat, about the hamster he was still not allowed to have but was working on acquiring through what he called strategic negotiation. Rafael cut Noah's pasta into small pieces. Clara wiped sauce from Noah's chin. They moved around each other with the instinctive rhythm of people who had practiced this together for longer than 3 weeks, as if they had always been doing this, as if they had always been a family and just now were discovering it. Papa, Noah said, his fork pausing mid-journey to his mouth. Can Mama sleep on our floor tonight? Because I had a bad dream and I want Mama near me. Rafael looked at Clara. Clara looked at Noah. The child was completely serious, completely unaware that he had just said something that would matter forever. Yes, Rafael said. Mama can sleep in the room next to yours. But only if she wants to. Clara's voice came out steady even though her hands were shaking. I want to. 2 weeks after that night, Rafael opened the nursery door for the first time in 7 years. They stood in the doorway together, Clara and Rafael, looking at what had been preserved like a tomb. A crib with ivory railings, a mobile overhead with stars and moon spinning slowly in the air currents, paint on the wall spelling out Mateo in gold letters. Dust covered everything. A grief so thick you could see it hanging in the light. I could not save him, Rafael said. His voice was barely audible. But you saved Noah. You saved me. Clara held his hand. She had learned that sometimes the only thing you could do when someone was breaking was hold them and stay. They began boxing up the nursery on a Saturday morning. They did not throw things away. They wrapped each item in tissue paper as if it deserved ceremony. The mobile went into a box marked with care. The crib was carefully disassembled. As they worked, Rafael told her about Mateo. 7 years old. Loved basketball. Laughed at jokes no one else thought were funny. Died of leukemia on a Tuesday in March, and Rafael had never let anyone touch the room again until now. He would have liked you, Rafael said as they wrapped the wooden star from the mobile. He was brave like you. He was kind like you. By evening, the nursery was empty. The walls were white and waiting. The door stood open like a new beginning. 1 month after the raid, Rafael, Clara, and Noah walked through Central Park on a Saturday afternoon. The same playground where Preston had attacked. Noah ran ahead toward the swings, and Rafael took Clara's hand. Not accidentally. Not in passing. Fully. In sunlight. In public, where his men could see, where the city could see, where anyone watching could understand. What happens now? Clara asked. She was looking at their joined hands like she was not quite sure they were real. Now we live, Rafael said. No more closets. No more hiding. No more debts. Just us. Just family. Noah called out from the swings. Mama. Papa. Watch me. They watched him together. A child swinging toward the sky. Two people who had been broken standing beside each other, still standing, still breathing, still choosing to stay. 6 months later, Christmas Eve, Rafael's private booth in the back of his restaurant. The restaurant was closed to everyone but family. Clara in a simple green dress, Noah in a tiny suit with a bow tie that kept turning sideways, Rafael in black that made him look like the Mafia boss he had been and would always be, but his eyes were gentle now, tired in a way that meant he was learning how to rest. The table was set with Rafael's mother's china, candles everywhere, snow falling outside the windows beyond the glass, the city glittering like scattered diamonds. Noah was chattering about school, about his hamster named Zorro, about a field trip to the Natural History Museum where he had seen dinosaurs that were bigger than houses and probably would have eaten anybody who tried to kidnap him. Clara and Rafael watched him with matching expressions. Wonder. Disbelief that this was real. That this fragile, beautiful thing had survived. 6 months ago I had $17 in my pocket, Clara said quietly, speaking to no one and everyone. A handwritten list of debts that kept growing, bruises I hid under long sleeves. I thought I was nobody. I thought protecting one small boy was the last good thing I would ever do. I was wrong. Rafael's hand found hers under the table. 6 months ago I was about to kill the only woman who ever saw my son as a person instead of a pawn, he said. I thought betrayal was the only language anyone spoke in my world. I thought love died with my first child. I was wrong. Preston Mercer was serving 40 years in federal prison. No parole. The corrupt cops dismantled. The protection racket destroyed. Victoria Ashford was serving 25 years for conspiracy to commit kidnapping. All her assets seized. Her name stripped from every charity board, every social registry, every place she had tried to matter. Too quick, too easy, too merciful would have been death. This was systematic destruction. This was living with consequences while everything crumbled. Rafael pulled out a small box. Black velvet. He slid it across the table to Clara. What is this? Clara asked. Open it, he said. Inside was a key. Gold. Ornate. The kind of key that unlocked important things. The penthouse is in your name now, Rafael said. Legally. So if you ever want to leave, you can. But I am asking you to stay. Not as Noah's nanny. Not as someone I pay. As family. As the woman I love. As the person who saw me when I could not see myself. Noah interrupted, completely oblivious to the weight of the moment. Does this mean Clara is staying forever? If she says yes, Rafael said. Clara looked at this man who could have killed her but chose to trust her. At this boy who called her Mama. At this table covered in food and light and safety. She took the key. She put it in her pocket next to the old handwritten debt list she kept as a reminder of where she had been, and she said, yes. I am staying. Forever. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is reach out your hand when you have nothing left to give. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let someone help you. And sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. If this story moved you, drop a like right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear that broken things can be made whole. Subscribe so you do not miss tomorrow's story, because we have another one that will remind you why we fight for the people we love. And remember this, you are never too broken to be loved. You are never too lost to be found. Sometimes you just need one person to see you. Be that person for someone else. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We wish you good health, joy, and peace. No matter how hard life gets, remember that after the rain, the sky clears. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.